Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Proud series of Courageous Conversations. Proud stands for people reaching out for unity and diversity. And the mission of Proud is to sponsor opportunities that will encourage Ferguson residents to work together to build a community of harmony and equity within a diverse group of people. So we see Courageous Conversations as an integral part of our mission. Courageous Conversations provide a neutral forum where we can listen to the diverse goodwill voices of our community, work to improve understandings between all of us, and find ways to work together to help heal our community and help move together into a better future. So tonight we do part 2 of our discussion of the consent decree. So tonight we hope to investigate what we think success looks like. What do the Ferguson Police Department and municipal courts need to achieve to satisfy the goals of the consent decree? What are your priority issues that must be addressed before the consent decree should end? And what needs to be in place to ensure that the achievements of the consent decree continue long into the future? So we are extremely fortunate to have a special guest tonight to help us answer some of these questions. Ms. Natashia Tidwell is the lead for the consent decree monitoring team. So during our Courageous Conversation, the last time, we mainly talked about the consent decree as an agreement between the Department of Justice and the City of Ferguson. But there are a couple other entities that are also involved. The first is the Department of Justice. The consent decree is decided by a federal judge, and we may refer to her tonight. It's the Honorable Catherine Perry is the judge who is Perry. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. So she actually has the ultimate decision of when she sees that the consent decree has been successfully met, the terms of the agreement have been met. The fourth group that's involved is the monitoring team, and they are the center between all these other 3 groups. They are the liaison between the other 3. They primarily act, and if I say anything wrong, please, I would appreciate any corrections and filling in the gaps here. But the monitoring team primarily acts as the eyes and ears for the judge. It is their responsibility to go and collect the information and present it to the judge so that she can help in making her assessments of how the consent decree progress is going. She also works directly with the Department of Justice and the city, listening to the discussions between them and providing experts to help with different aspects of the consent decree. So tonight's presentation will feature the lead of the the monitoring team, Natashia Tidwell. So we're going to try to do a little bit different format from the last time because we had several people ask that we have a more open forum for the discussion. So we're going to start with Ms. Tidwell's presentation, and after that we will have an open forum for our discussion. If you have comments or questions during the presentation, or if you would like to just get in the queue to be able to talk later, you could put your comments into the chat, and then we will have that available for the discussion later. So without further ado, we're very, very honored to have Natashia Tidwell here, and thank you for your presentation tonight.
Thank you, Alan, and hello, everyone. I feel like it's been so long since I've seen so many of you. I'm getting like a little like, oh my God, you know, everybody, because I haven't traveled anywhere. I've just been in the house. And so excuse me if you have trouble understanding me. I had some surgery. I'm recovering nicely and well, but it has affected my speech a little bit, but I'm okay. God, it's just so good to see everybody. I can't even, you know, it's, I'm glad that everybody's healthy and happy, hopefully, in this crazy world Thank you, Alan and Proud, for squeezing us in tonight. It was a little last minute. I know we were trying to find a date to meet with everyone, and we didn't want to conflict with too many other events that were happening in the city. And Nicole mentioned that this was happening, and I knew that Alan was kind enough to extend an invitation to us last month, and I couldn't make it. So I thought that this might be, that hopefully that this would work. And so Alan did a great job of framing sort of our role in the consent decree process. I will just say that the consent decree is not decided by Judge Perry. The consent decree is an agreement between the city and the Department of Justice for implementation of all of these various reforms. And it's supervised by the court to make sure that both parties sort of stick to what they agreed to do. But ultimately, it's for the parties to bring this, or for the city to bring this to implementation, working with the Justice Department. The monitoring team does serve as the eyes and ears for the court. Alan was right in that, and helping me to do that, as Alan mentioned, are a team of subject matter experts, which, because of this virtual environment, we're fortunate that people can be a part of meetings that they probably wouldn't have had a chance to make in the past. So I think, if I have this correctly, that we have Professor Kim Norwood here. So I don't know if she can, I can't see her, but I there.
Hey, yeah, I was cooking, so yeah, I'm back.
So
Good to see you.
Professor Norwood is our lead consultant in for bias-free policing and other consent decree areas. As most of you, all of you know, she's an esteemed professor of law at WashU. So we're happy that she could join us here tonight. I wish I could see her. I don't want to keep swiping to try to find people. And I think that Bob Stewart is also here. Bob, are you here?
I am.
You guys are nodding. You can see him. I can't.
Yeah, but I'm multitasking over here, and nobody should see that.
Okay. So Bob handles most of our sort of policing areas. We sort of split those duties, but he does most of those. So use of force, training, those areas are Bob's areas of expertise, and he leads the monitoring team's efforts on those things. We also have Dr. Leigh Anderson, I think.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right. I'm 3 for 3. And Dr. Anderson is our lead on community engagement efforts. She is a native, or has family still in Ferguson. I can't remember if she's a native or not. Leigh?
I am not. I grew up in South St. Louis City, but most of my family lives in Ferguson now.
Okay, right. So she is our community engagement subject matter expert. And then last, and certainly not least, is Courtney Caruso, who is just recently named the deputy monitor here in Ferguson, because she is my right hand and my left hand, and keeps the trains running on time, and gets everything sort of organized, and works closely with the consent decree coordinator, Ms. Barton, in the city, and gets everything sort of organized, and runs point on a lot of the things that I, just can't sort of, I'm just not organized enough to do. So say hello, Courtney.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
Hi, Courtney.
So, ooh, I got my own echo back at myself. So I wanted to obviously leave time for, am I giving myself feedback, or somebody's mic on? I think it's better now. Okay.
It's better.
That was our fault. Sorry.
Okay. And I just saw that Kim Norwood's, she just sent out a chat that Mayor Jones sure sounds nice. And I should say, yes, I've been calling her Your Royal Highness ever since the consent decree started. So now I guess I have to switch to Mayor Jones. So it is nice to say that, and I wish I could see you as well, because I haven't seen you since you were elected. So congratulations, Mayor Jones. So I want to leave time for discussion about the consent decree. I did just sort of want to talk a little bit big picture wise of where we are in the process. We are now working towards filing a report that talks about the progress in the past few months, and sort of looks ahead to what we've got planned for the next 6 months. We haven't COVID has impacted everything, our ability to be on site. We recently had some meetings with the city, some virtual meetings. We used to try to meet, at least once a year, particularly around the time of our status conferences with Judge Perry, but we haven't been able to do that. And I think in the early part of COVID, we all thought that, well, just pause because we'll be out of this pretty soon. So there's no need to sort of think long term that this is going to be the way things are. And then months and months and months go by, and it turns out that this is the way that things are. And so I think it certainly took me a while to adjust to that and to try to figure out, what sorts of things we can do remotely, as we try to move into the phase of auditing compliance in a lot of areas that involves reviewing reports, whether they be in the municipal court or in the police department, figuring out the logistics of how we're going to be able to review those materials without having Chief Armstrong and Nicole put somebody at a copy machine just scanning documents to send to us over and over again. So we've got to figure out some creative ways to do some of the things that we just took for granted before, and we're adjusting to that. So we are preparing to file our semi-annual report that talks about our activities, but more importantly, discusses what is yet to come in year 5. And I think the big, the big focus, or the foci for year 5, which we are in, July began year 5 of the consent decree. For those of you who don't know, we're going to be focusing on training because I think most, if not all, of the major policies have already been implemented, have been drafted and implemented. Some, if not all, have been through the sort of roll call briefing for full implementation, but some have been implemented for quite some time, so we can begin auditing those. But in terms of the department's training program, that it would include in-service training and supervisory training, building that sort of training, how that's going to work to make it sort of systemic, that we have these subjects in in-service training. These are the things that officers will go outside of the department to get state certification for. These are the things that we can do in-house. So working to get sort of all of that into a plan so that it's consistent and people know, when training is expected and in what areas, and how to train consistent with what's required under the consent decree requires a lot of training, a lot of planning and coordination. And so that's going to be sort of the big, one of the big sort of projects for the city this year, is to come up with that training plan. And I know that the city has been working with a training committee comprised of some of the members of the NPSC. I think there is some thought to looking outside of that to the local universities for some additional subject matter expertise. But it's a really big project to try to not only coordinate training from within and get scheduling, that sort of logistical stuff, but to also think about what the consent decree requires. So for instance, if the state offers a training course in use of force, and Ferguson says, we're going to send our officers to the state use of force course, that's fine, and it would fulfill the officers' state certification requirements, the post requirements. But the issue is, does that training that the state offers meet with or cover all of the areas that the consent decree requires that the officers get in training? And so use of force is just sort of one example, but it would require someone to look at the post training, the curriculum, the lesson plan, all of the things that are covered, and compare it side by side, and do this gap analysis with the consent decree. And if for areas that from the consent decree that aren't covered in the state training, the city or the police department has to figure out a plan for how to get that, those gaps filled, whether they do their own training in-house, whether they go to some other outside training to fulfill those requirements, or best case scenario, the post or the state training covers all of the areas that the consent decree requires and more. But we won't know that, or they can't sort of show to the monitoring team or illustrate their compliance with that unless they, until they sort of do that side-by-side comparison as part of their training plan to show us sort of how they plan to meet the training requirements of the consent decree in all of these different areas. So that sort of is a really fulsome sort of project. It takes a lot of sort of some subject matter expertise. It's not sort of, intuitive, in some ways, particularly if you've got to build out your own training within to fill those gaps. And I know that Chief Armstrong is working with some department members to either have them become trainers on their own so they can come back and train the police department, their fellow officers. I know there's some talk about having outside departments come in to do some training in different areas. And I don't want to, I know the police department's working on that, so I don't want to say too much because I feel like that's their role to sort of, speak on how far along they are in those things. But those are sort of some of the things that go into putting all this massive training plan together. And that certainly is one of the priorities for year 5. Similarly is, and has always been, is community engagement has been a priority, not only for year 5, but for all years, and particularly just in creating a consistent community policing program that not only sort of touches upon community engagement in getting the police department out into the community with certain events. And I know it's hard to do that for everybody now with COVID, but I know that the police department has been making efforts to get out into the community and to have coordinated events, community engagement events, and has been working to build relationships with the neighborhood association. So all of those things, those community engagement type touch points are moving along. What we need is, what we're working towards in year 5 is still building upon that, but having it be in a way that's a way that we can measure it as the monitoring team. So how can we go in, is it structured in such a way that we can assess whether or not it's fulfilling the goals of the consent decree, whether these meetings with various neighborhood associations or with community groups are fulfilling the consent decree's vision of fostering these sort of trusting relationships with members of the community. Is the community being heard? Is their input being valued? So one of the things that the consent decree requires is the building of a policy that asks the police department, how they're going to work with the NPSC in terms of implementing recommendations from the NPSC and putting those forward into policy. So all of these various consent decree provisions not only require sort of the community, the police to build these relationships, but also to show that it's not just, it's not, surface level cosmetic, that it really is sort of a back and forth, and that ideas are sort of brainstorming, and it's a true sort of community policing type effort. So all of that goes into the community engagement, community policing bucket. There are policies and plans. Part of it is thinking about how the police department is staffed, whether or not the hours that officers work are conducive to community policing. So it's sort of this multi-layered sort of process with all these things working together, that it's not only just I know Ms. Barton has been working on the facilitated dialogues. Trying to do that virtually is also sort of a challenge we didn't anticipate, but all of these various different initiatives go into the building of the community policing and engagement program. And that's obviously one of the main priorities for year 5 as well. And then I think the last area that I talked a little bit about some of the audits that we're planning to do this year, whether it's in use of force, the accountability, internal investigations area will be auditing this year as well, to see whether the goals of the policy are being met. How are the investigations being conducted? Are they fair? Are they thorough? Do they meet with what's required under the consent decree? Both the internal investigations as well as any use of force investigations as well. And then the last area that I'll talk about before I hand it off to Dr. Anderson to talk a little bit about the upcoming community survey is the municipal court. which, you know, as many of you, if you've come to our court hearings, you know, was the one area that got started or had sort of a jump start on the consent decree provision. So the municipal court had started working towards implementation, or at least had made more progress towards implementation before the police department really got sort of going in terms of policy development, because there were a lot more policies to develop on the police department side than there were in the municipal court. And so much of the municipal court work was around getting rid of the old city ordinances around manner of walking and failure to appear, and sort of all of those policies that were rescinded. Much of the municipal court work was about making sure that no cases lingered under those charges. And so once the municipal court got through sort of dismissing those cases, it was time to sort of work through and implement the comprehensive amnesty program, which requires the dismissal of cases, pre-2014 cases, if there had not been any disposition on those cases. So essentially, if the person had never shown up to court and there was sort of this outstanding warrant for them from a case pre-2014, the consent decree requires that the case be dismissed unless there's good cause to keep it open. And the parties, the city and the Department of Justice, came up with good cause criteria, or criteria for what it means to keep the case open in pre-2014 cases, and the 2014 case. And the monitoring team has sort of gone through to see that the cases that are kept open under these good cause criteria meet the criteria, so that we can report out as to hopefully the successful completion of the comprehensive amnesty program. And I'll say that we're almost there. We have one particular provision, good cause criteria number 3, which has to do with driving a motor vehicle after suspension, and it's complicated in how it's written. So we're trying to figure out how best to audit it so that we can figure out whether it's being implemented correctly. And so that sort of is the only one of the 5 good cause criteria that we cannot close out at this point, but we're hoping to do so relatively soon. So all of that will sort of be laid out, hopefully in a much more articulate way and a lot slower in our semi-annual report. And as I think I mentioned to Alan and to the folks on our listserv, this is not the only opportunity that, this will not be the only time that we come or in this way to discuss the semi-annual report and the progress on the consent decree. We're going to set up another sort of virtual town hall type event once we get past the Thanksgiving holiday and get the semi-annual report in a little bit more final condition so that we can report on that. And so I want to turn it over to Dr. Leigh Anderson, who's going to talk about the upcoming community survey and what our plans are for trying to do that this year in this new normal.
Thank you, Natasha. So good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. So I just want to give a little bit of background. So each year, the monitoring team is directed in the consent decree to conduct a community survey. And what the purpose of the survey is just to inform the department's understanding of community concerns and to also help them inform priority actions. And so in order to do this, the survey was conducted last year. And those results are available, but we want to get a more representative sample this year. And so we're doing a lot of outreach. The team did that last year, but we're hoping that we can garner more support to sort of see a sense of what everyone is thinking about this process, about sort of the work that's been done thus far, and help to get us some results so that we can be able to help the police department in their analysis, look at some of the areas that should be further prioritized and what areas have been sort of completed, not necessarily to anyone's particular satisfaction in terms of the community, but for us to get an assessment of what's happening, what are the thoughts of the community. So for that to be said, one of the things that we're going to do is we're launching it on 3 different modes. So the first is it's going to be online. The next is it's going to be mail. And then we are going to place the survey at certain areas throughout, accessible areas throughout the Ferguson community. So we're still figuring out where those areas are going to be, but we will certainly be in touch. We've already had the pleasure to speak with the apartment building managers and being able to get them online. And so this is great, and great opportunity to speak to you all, to encourage you all to please take the survey. And I know for me, one of the things that I think about when I'm being asked to take a survey is what are the parameters? So one of the things that I wanted to do was to talk to you all about one of the first questions, right? So what are you anticipating? And so some of the data that we're collecting. So one of the questions, how well are the police doing at the following? And I'm just going to list a few of the areas, okay? Fighting crime, dealing with problems that concern your neighborhood, being visible on the streets, being available when you need them, responding promptly to calls for assistance, helping victims of crime, and treating people fairly regardless of who they are. So a lot of these different questions basically are rooted in something that the consent decree already represents. And so we're able to gather information based on people's responses and be able to do an analysis and to present that data on how far we have come and where we need to go after that. So I would encourage your support of taking the survey. Please, anyone else that you know, encourage them to take the survey. There are multiple ways to access the survey. So when you see it pushed out, please participate and encourage others to participate as well. Thank you so much for your time.
And I'll just add sort of one note where Leigh mentioned that one of the modes was by mail. So we are going to send out postcards to, we have a voter registration list, and we also have a list of people who had some interaction with the municipal court in the recent months, because we want them, whether they live in Ferguson or not, to sort of be able to weigh in on the survey as well. So all of those folks will receive a card in the mail that will have the whatever they call those, QR code or whatever it is that launches the survey, so you can go online and take it. And it'll also list some of the city buildings where surveys are available to be picked up and dropped off. And so we wanted to, in this COVID environment, we don't want to drive too many people to, in-person places. We're sort of denied the opportunity to be in the community or knocking on doors, which I was sort of hesitant to do anyway pre-COVID, but certainly now we want to be maintain safety, especially since the population, the demographics of the people who we want to hear from, that the consent decree says that we should be hearing more from, are the communities most impacted by COVID. And so we really want to be mindful of that in trying to implement or administer the survey, but we also want to make a concerted effort to try to hear more from those areas. And so we will do more outreach with the neighborhood associations and the property managers to hopefully have surveys on site in the various neighborhood associations, so that folks can get them there or get them at city buildings. And so that's sort of the plan. And again, word of mouth always helps. So if everyone here tells 5 people to take the survey, and those 5 people tell 5 people, then we're well on our way to really hearing from a lot more folks this year. And it would be really appreciative. I know the parties would appreciate it, and I know that Judge Perry would as well. And so, Alan, I don't know if Cassandra, if you're the woman in charge, but I think that's it for us for now. We're happy to take questions. Well, not happy, but we'll do it. So.
Thank you so much. That was informative, and I'm really glad. One of my complaints has been for the last 2 status hearings, we don't know what's going on. So I'm glad that you were able to to come to the community in this format and share what's going on to some degree. So what probably Alan and I neglected to say at the beginning is that this particular forum is really designed for the community to ask questions, because we know that the consent decree is an important part of our community. And there's a lot of different opinions about its worth, et cetera. So the last time we got good information too, but because of the format, people weren't able to ask a lot of questions. So we tried to structure this forum where we could leave time for people to ask questions. But we forgot to tell people that how to ask those questions from the beginning. So if you have any questions, if you could just put your name in chat and we can just call on you as your name comes up. And then you can ask your question, or if you prefer, you can just type your question in the chat. So, and I see who's here, so I know we have people with questions. So.
And the only thing I would add is Ms. Tidwell has to leave at 7:30, so if we have any specific questions for her, we probably want to prioritize those.
Yeah, so perhaps if you have a general question, you can say your name, general question. If you have a question for a specific person, put your name and then the person's name that you want to address it to.
And thank you, Alan. I have a little bit of flexibility. It's not a hard stop at I guess would be 8:30 my time. But I do have, some family stuff that probably I should probably get to, because it's getting late in the evening on a school night. So there's a lot happening here. So, but I won't sort of disappear right at 7:30 your time, but I don't know that I'll be able to stay all the way until, I guess, 8 o'clock your time.
So let me just ask the first question, just for clarity purpose, while we're waiting for the questions to come in. So as far as the municipal court obligations in the consent decree, is that a done deal, or are there any outstanding issues with the municipal court?
Yeah, so there are still a few policies that are waiting to be implemented. So there's a larger procedural policy just around how the municipal court operations. So around, how the judge does an assessment of whether someone has the ability to pay a fine, how they keep track of contact information for people when they come into court, what the community service offerings are, and how you keep track of all of that. Many of these things they've done sort of one-off policies, and they have sort of practices to implement all of those. But there's one policy that sort of brings it all together that's still in development, that sort of systemizes it in a way. There's also policies designed to assist English language learners, people with limited English proficiency. So that's a policy that's being developed as well. And I think those are the last two policies in the municipal court. There is one that deals with the city's auditing of their own citations, so that there's some communication between the court and the police department. If an officer makes an error in filling out a citation and it gets to the municipal court, is there a way that the court can communicate back to the police department, so there's some record of the error and what was done to correct it, all of those, so those kind of getting those systems in place. So that's another policy, but it's between the police and the court, so it's not just a court policy. And those are the last two policies for the municipal court. But as I said before, there still is this piece on the comprehensive amnesty program and sort of having that finalized and completed. And we're just, getting sort of a handle on or figuring out how we're going to audit and assess the good cause criteria 3 and the cases kept open under that criteria, which are the largest number of the cases that remain open, is sort of the question that remains that we're still working through.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And I think probably 10 questions came in. No, let me see. So Jerry Knowles has a question he'd like to ask Dr. Leigh Anderson. So Jerry, if you want to unmute and ask her the question.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Cassandra. Dr. Anderson, hi.
Yes, hi.
And let me just also mention for a second, Jerry Knowles is a member of the CRB, our Citizen Review Board.
Yep, I remember. Dr. Anderson may not, but I do.
Heads up, just give you a
Thank
heads up.
So my question is about the survey, and it's
Yes,
really a simple question, but it's based on the last survey kind of. So I was just wondering how many questions are on it. And the reason I'm asking that is I think the previous community survey, if I remember right, I don't remember how many questions it had, and there was some complexity to it. But me personally, I started doing the survey, and somewhere in the middle of it, I gave up on it. I don't think I ever completed it. There was something complicated about it, and I don't remember exactly what it was. So I'm kind of asking, I'm hoping you're not going to say there's like 50 questions or something like that.
No, so it's not 50 questions. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Knoll, but I think that what you may be referring to is the manner in which you respond to the questions. So as I mentioned before, you have this just as a simple question, but then the responses themselves are sort of multi-part. I think that may be sort of what you may be thinking about.
There was something about it, and I don't remember, it was a while back, but something, at some point I just said, I don't know how more complicated this is going to get, and I just gave up on it.
Yes. And so, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I would encourage everyone to sort of, as you're thinking about the survey and thinking about telling others about it, that it's really something that we would encourage everyone to, on a day when you're relaxed, have a seat, when you have a moment, having a cup of coffee, cup of tea, and just go through and think, sort of methodically about your responses, right? And so I completely understand survey fatigue. It is something that happens all of the time. Just the other day, I was at a store, and before I could check out, they wanted me to do a survey. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, right. So I got to question number 2, and I was like, how long is this survey? I just want to check out and go. So I completely understand. It can happen with 3 questions. It can happen with 50. And so the good thing is that there aren't 50 questions. Again, I think that the format in which the responses are collected is what you're probably referring to. And so it looks like, Natasha, do you have, or Courtney, do you have I have the survey up.
Yeah, but I will just say, so it is the same survey, because what we want to do is we want to be able to track sort of what the responses were in the first and last year, and how they differed, if they differed in second year. So you want to have that consistency throughout surveys, but it's helpful. We do have some, and as some of you may know, the Police Foundation in Washington, D.C. is the one that sort of that created the survey, because they've tested the questions. It's a long sort of process to sort of have questions that are properly calibrated, and sort of so that you don't get sort of false negatives or positives or whatever it is. So they have created the survey. We do have some room to sort of either change or move around questions, or I don't know how much we can simplify it in that way, or get around sort of the multi, if your answer is yes, go to number 40. If it's no, go to number 20. That sort of stuff. I don't know whether or not we have much, whether we can go in and sort of intervene at that level, but it certainly is helpful to hear Any feedback is sort of helpful. So just hearing that might be a barrier to some people completing and returning it, just the, this sort of feeling of complexity is something we can bring back to the police.
It was a barrier for me anyway.
Well, you're all that matters, Mr. Knoll. Forget about, whatever. So,
No,
Okay,
and
but
this
I'll make the effort.
Courtney.
I'll make the effort this time. Yeah. Okay.
Well, this is Courtney. I just wanted to add additionally that not all of you don't have to respond to every single question. If you want to leave some blank, you can leave them blank. There is a second part of the survey that asks you if you've had a recent interaction with an FPD officer. And if the answer to that is yes, then you get a second set of questions. But if you say no, then the survey is over. And if you say, yes, I've had an interaction, but I don't want to answer additional questions about this, the survey is also over. So that's some added context. And the only other thing is I saw a question about the time frame. We're anticipating that mailing to go out in December. So we're looking at near future for the survey for everyone to be aware of.
and when we say December, we mean the first week of December. So we may sort of put it online or sort of, just release it before that, which would be like, maybe around, the end of next week or early the following week. So it may be that the survey, you might get a message on our listserv or some other with the link to the survey to just start taking it. We're not sort of waiting for the card to go out, but we do want to make sure that we've got the locations nailed down and confirmed where people can pick them up so that we can put that on the mailing that will go on the postcard that's going to go out there.
Confirm, corroborate, substantiate, verify, authenticate.
And Courtney, you reminded me that was one of the questions that threw me, like an interaction with a Ferguson police officer. And I was puzzling, are they meaning just like any interaction or like a crime stop or something? So I said, well, yeah, I've had interactions with police officers. And then it seemed like the series of questions after that didn't fit at all the type of interactions I had. So that was one of the questions that threw me for a loop. When you mentioned it, that reminded me of that. Yeah. So I forget what path it led me down, but I thought, well, my interaction doesn't fit any of these things. So. Anyway,
Mr. Knoll, really quickly, I don't want to take up too much time, but when you mentioned sort of the difference between your interactions and what the survey captured, how drastically different was it?
It's been so long ago, I don't remember. It just
okay.
Like Dr. Anderson, would this
yes.
classify as an interaction with me being in this meeting? Say if we were having this meeting in person. And so I think that's kind of, the questions of what people are getting at is what classifies as an interaction.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Okay, understood. Okay.
Because I'll see the chief sometimes at the CRB meetings and stuff like that. And I would say, okay, I've had an interaction, but I don't know that the survey would lead me down a path of saying what kind of interaction that was.
Okay, so it was the classification of the interaction that was the issue. Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay, so let me.
Was wearing that tie at the meeting when you interacted with him?
I've never seen that.
Nobody has ever seen this bow tie before. I brought this specially out for this special occasion.
So let me just, with that question, so it will be introduced by December, it sounds like, and you expect to wrap it up by end of January or?
No, last time we did about 90 days. I think it'll be about the same this time. I think we extended it a little bit on the last year because there were some events that we thought we might be able to increase participation. So we held it up, but it'll be at least 90 days. That sort of is the floor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Mildred Kleins has a question about community policing. Mildred.
Hi, everyone. So my question is, and I guess it's to Natashia. So I've seen other municipalities, police departments in Ferguson. Now, I was just wondering, I remember at the very beginning, we were talking about how if anyone came into Ferguson from another municipality, law enforcement, that they would have to abide by the guidelines that was set in our consent decree. And so I was wondering, is that still going on? And something that a few weeks ago, it was Calverton Park Police Department, which is the sister municipality. They were in Ferguson, but it wasn't any Ferguson police around. So I was just wondering how much in the loop are you all, the monitors team, how much in the loop are you all about participating municipalities coming into Ferguson, policing, answering calls, or assisting or whatever, and are they following the guidelines? Because I know at first a lot of people didn't want to come into Ferguson because they said that we were, we were too strict. We were restricted so much, and a lot of people didn't want to follow those guidelines. So, are you all aware of that? That we do have other municipalities participating or coming in to assist Ferguson, and if so, is the understanding there? Because I know even before Chief Armstrong, of course, we had the consent decree before Chief Armstrong came. So, just wondering, are you all aware of that as well?
Sure. Thank you. And hi, Mildred.
Hi.
So this came up at the last status hearing with Judge Perry. So we've been, and I should say, when Alan sort of laid out at the beginning how the monitor is sort of a liaison, or for all of these various sort of stakeholders in the consent decree, as much as we can as a monitoring team, and this is certainly Judge Perry's philosophy, is that if the parties can, we want the parties to work together first on an issue. And if they can't work it out, or if there's no agreement, then they come to the monitoring team and to the court. And so we're not, and I'm not just, I don't say that to say that that's happened, but I do say that in terms of the issue of other officers or other departments coming to Ferguson to assist, it usually comes up or has come up around protests. And so there's a provision in the state law called a Code 1000 provision that, a mutual aid type thing where other departments come into Ferguson to assist. We haven't talked a lot about it just in terms of other officers coming in to answer calls for service or anything like that. We have talked about it in the larger context, whether it would be the protests that happened after George Floyd or the anniversary last year. And so there is some information sharing, after action reports, other things, and the parties are in dialogue about that. The monitoring team and the court is aware. So that sort of is how we, that's our lens in on sort of these things that are going on. But yes, the consent decree does apply. There's sort of provisions about it in terms of how to report uses of force, or sort of what is acceptable, but the after action reports will sort of give us a lot of information about sort of what happened in more recently, not necessarily at sort of the level of if you saw officers in recently answering calls for service, but around sort of larger events.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, thank you. So John Chasnoff has a question. I will let him ask his question, but before you ask your question, John, I just wanted to say this is a pretty open forum about the consent decree. So I know last time we didn't really get a chance, if you had questions, to ask Chief Armstrong or Nicole Barton, putting them on the hot seat too, since they're here, in case someone has a question to ask them. Or I see we have members from the CRB here. I saw Brenda Young's name pop up, as well as Jerry Knowles. And there might be someone else too. So anything related to the consent decree that you have a question about is fair game for a question. So John, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good to see so many faces again. I appreciate being here tonight. This was a question for the monitor. The NPSC has only met once since March, since COVID. And part of the problem is, I think, technological and just people's reticence about getting on Zoom and not knowing how. So I had a two-part question. The first part is there any help that we might get from either the parties or the monitor to help us overcome some of those technological problems and get people on a Zoom meeting for the NPSC? And secondly, I'm wondering, since community input and involvement is such a big part of the consent decree, if NPSC is not able to get itself up and running again, how will you evaluate adequate compliance with the consent decree in that regard?
Well, thank you for your question. So I was not aware of the NPSC having not met since March, and that's unfortunate. I don't know, quite frankly, I don't want to say that, this is because the consent decree didn't contemplate that people wouldn't be able to meet, right? So certainly it's an issue, right? Because it is the NPSC is the only, I think one of the only, and certainly the most prominently named community organization within the consent decree. It's the NPSC and the CRB are both named. So having it be operational and functional is critical to sort of a lot of the work that goes on. So I will certainly raise it with the parties. We've got a call with Judge Perry coming up, but this is so I can't say what the parties can do or what the monitor can do to sort of give everyone Zoom or to give everybody the technology or sort of to make it better. But I can certainly it is something that we should talk about, and I'm glad that I've heard about it, that you told me about it. And so the other piece, much like all of the other consent decree provisions that have been impacted by COVID, when we try to, and I know the department and the city have made efforts to try to, have workarounds through virtual, whether it's the facilitated dialogues or other things to try to, keep things moving, particularly on the community engagement side of things, which is the most challenging to do in this remote environment. And so we, as the monitoring, I think that Dr. Anderson can speak to this probably, more, she's probably got more insight into this. We don't want to sort of foreclose that, well, none of that counts in terms of your compliance, that you're doing things online, because the consent decree says that it has to be done this way. But we're also can't be in a position where we, that we grade everything as if it happened in person when it's happening in a remote environment. So figuring out the balance between some credit, we don't want to give no credit for these things, but you can't give sort of all credit for things that aren't happening in person. But to say on the NPSC side of things, we didn't know that, this is the first that we've heard that you're not meeting. So we're going to have to sort of figure out what that means. And I hope it doesn't, that it's not worst case scenario that it doesn't get up and running again. I don't want to sort of think in those terms. I hope that's not, I hope we can sort of figure out how to get things moving again for the NPSC.
Okay,
This is Nicole. I can help coordinate, any meetings, Zoom meetings, John, if there's, because I coordinate many of the Zoom meetings that we are having. And I know we were meeting, the subcommittees were meeting via Zoom bi-weekly for ever since February, and we weren't having an issue. So if the group as a whole is having some issue, or if it's just individuals, if somebody can reach out to me, I can probably help with that. I mean, I can't go to anybody's house and take my computer and let them get on, but I can certainly coordinate the meeting if you need a Zoom link, and I can help, maybe I can talk an individual who's having problems, technical problems through it. Because like I said, all of our subcommittee meetings, the CRB meetings, our neighborhood meetings, we've been having Zoom meetings consistently. So if I know what the issue is, the technical issue is, maybe I can help. So yeah, just feel free to reach out to me tomorrow and I'll see what I can do to help.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the offer. I do want to clarify a little bit. Yes, has been very challenging for the NPSC main body, but I do want to acknowledge that the NPSC facilitation team has met a few times, and it's the facilitation team that generally sets the agenda for the main committee. So there have been some meetings, even as late as August. Mildred was the last NPSC facilitation meeting in August. I think, because I remember at the park.
I think it was.
It was
And
at the park.
yeah, it was
So,
in August. Mhm. And we the community engagement, the MPSC community engagement team, we were meeting every other week and we never
by Zoom.
stopped.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we can work it out if I just know.
Well,
what
we
the-
had that deadline. We were trying to get a document to the DOJ. And so then we breathed. Okay, so thanks. So Nes Savalas has a question about implicit bias in training. So Nes, do you want to ask your question?
Well, I wrote it in the box, so I'm not sure if you can hear me clearly, but this is Nes Savala.
I can hear you.
And my question is, does the consent decree require implicit bias training for city employees? If so, how does the executive order impact training? And I'm referring to the executive order in my description that basically vilifies diversity training for organizations that receive federal funds.
The president's executive order.
Yeah.
Okay, I
So,
remember.
I don't know who the question was directed to, but I could answer it. That
No, I was directing it to whoever was going to be able to answer. So thank you, Chief Armstrong.
No problem, ma'am. Yeah, so that directive, that executive order was for federal employees, and that was training that was related to employees of the federal government. It has no bearing on a local police department here in Ferguson or any other local police department in the country.
Thank you. And Ms. Norwood.
I think there was a part of her question that so the consent decree requires that the police department and the municipal court have implicit bias training. I don't believe it speaks to the city as a whole. I think it's just the police and the municipal.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So Dr. Norwood, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I would echo what both have said.
Okay.
That not only does that order not apply to the cities and states, but my understanding is that Vice President-elect Biden is planning to undo it. So even if it did apply, it'll apply for a month, and then we'll be back in business hopefully next year for the federal entities that it'll apply to. So there's that. But yeah, I want to echo what the monitor has said. The consent decree only focuses on the court employees and the police. And so I'm currently waiting on some of the bias policies from the police. So I'm every day I'm sort of waiting on that to come through. I've already sort of reviewed some of the policies for actual training. And so my understanding is that that training might start for police in the next few months. So that's encouraging.
Okay, so I called Dr. Norwood because I know she had already done some implicit bias training. I remember you did training for the CRB, didn't you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I got the pleasure to sit in on that.
Yeah. And, I hesitate when we use the word training because it's like 90 minutes, and this is like a lifelong thing. So we just sort of scratched the surface, but yes, we did some, but we do, I'm excited and encouraged that we'll actually do some of this work with the court employees too. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think I should have here's another message. Joyce, did you have a question about community policing?
Yes, I was just wondering, is that part of the consent decree?
The bias training?
Community policing.
Community policing.
Yeah, so there's a community engagement and the establishment of a community policing program in Ferguson, and both are sort of hand in hand. As I talked about a little bit before, there are a lot of sort of layers to it in terms of getting stakeholders to the table, who's going to be involved in, whether it's the NPSC or other community groups, and sort of, how you problem solve, or sort of what is the program for identifying what a problem in the community is and what the appropriate response is, but also making sure that whatever the plan for how community policing is going to look, that the officer shift schedule and sort of the way patrol areas are set up are conducive to success in whatever the community policing plan is. So their community engagement and community policing are both parts of the consent decree.
Okay, so I'll ask a question, which is sort of related to the tension in the community about the consent decree, and possibly related to some of the campaigning for political offices, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, the feeling that some people ask, well, the consent decree is going to be over when? And of course, my answer, when we complete the consent decree. So we've had some false starts. And so the time frame has been pushed back because our accomplishments had a very slow start. So given what you see that's left to do, what is a realistic time frame if everything works like clockwork from here out? We still, you would say, have at least.
I'm not answering that.
I was trying to ask it in a non-threatening way.
Yeah, not answering that. But
we have more than a year left.
I think I can. So the consent decree, the provisions of the consent decree say that it's there have to be 2 years of substantial compliance with the consent decree before it can be terminated. That does not sort of prevent either party from asking the court to terminate the consent decree, but the consent decree requires that in doing so, they have to show that it's been, that there's been 2 years of substantial compliance in a row. So, so we are not there yet, and I would not I would not predict when we would be there. So I will just say that. And but before I go, I just
but it won't be. Yeah, it won't be next year.
We are not in substantial compliance yet, so I guess the 2-year clock is
after that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I would like to ask a question if I can before I go. And so, and anyone can sort of speak, but what does Ferguson look like post consent decree for you
Great
folks?
Question.
And I'm going to take credit for it, even though Courtney wrote it. But anyway,
I think we all could have written that. I think Alan mentioned it at the beginning. What does it look like? So who wants to go first? Mildred, I'm picking on you.
Okay, I can just give you my perspective. I think, to be quite honest with you, I see that our city has really made a effort to follow the consent decree. But I feel like sometimes it's like we take one step forward and one step back. That's just me looking at it. It's like, especially when it comes to our police department, the police that we have now, mostly are not the police that were there prior to 2014. And a lot of the police that we have now, to me, they're at, and it's just Mildred talking, to me, their attitudes are different. I think they came here. I mean, you have to want to come here to make a difference. The pay is not like that great. And I think we have a lot of people who came to Ferguson because they believe that they can make a difference. What I found, and maybe that'll change since we're trying to, change the administration. What I find is that there were so many people in Ferguson that I feel like we still fighting each other because, a lot of us felt like we needed something like this. And there's still a lot of people who felt like the government came in and ruined our city and they didn't see the need. And I still feel that friction where some people feel like, yes, they're here, yes, we're making a difference. And some people like, we didn't even need to make that difference. And, but as far as the police are concerned, that's why, I still like to encourage Chief Armstrong, just like when Chief Moss was here, to take the time to get the right people here for the right reasons. People come for the right reasons. So, you talk to people in the community, and a lot of people say they don't see a lot of changes, but these are people who are not really connected. When you actually sit people down and tell them of some of the changes that have taken place since the consent decree that they are not aware of. And that's one thing I was telling somebody, we need to inform the community about what's going on in our community. I don't know how to, somebody had mentioned going to churches or wherever the people are to educate them and get them informed to see that there are some changes, some positive changes being made. Yes, like Natashia said, we still got a long way to go before we call ourselves being in compliances for 2 years. There's still a lot of things, just with this police officer just in March or May, whatever it was, who did use the excessive force. He was on our police department. So we still got a lot of work to do. Not saying we're gonna ever be perfect, but I think we're a work in progress. And I see, me personally, I see us moving in the right direction. So I'm sorry.
No, that's really helpful, Mildred. And I will just say, I just want to you mentioned that the officer, and I saw that press release. But let's think, if we rewound and went back 7 years, would that officer still be on the department when he, at the time he got indicted? And so, so those, so having accountability systems, but and I don't know how much Chief Armstrong can or is in a position to talk about, but I think that yes, you're not going to get rid of sort of every issue that comes up with police. But if you've got systems in place, accountability systems, and that sort of, those sorts of things, that at least you intervene at a place where you might not have, pre-consent decree.
I agree. Yes.
So, thank you. So, let me see. I'm just going to say, I want to answer that question too. I just want to say, and everybody knows this, some of us saw Ferguson as a model. We could be the model. We could be the way policing should look. We could be the model where what happened to George Floyd doesn't happen, because we put the policies in place where that shouldn't happen, or what happened to Breonna Taylor. We want to be the solution because we want Michael Brown's death not to be in vain. So we just want to be the model. Our technical staff has noticed that the mayor is unmuted. She must have been muted herself. Do you want to respond, Mayor? We got a good team over here.
Of course, Cassandra. I looked at the police department prior to Michael Brown and the police department we have at this time. even though, you know, some people talk about we've been through 5 police chiefs, I think the last 2, that including you, Chief Armstrong, has taken active interest in the community. And when I say I take an active interest in the community, Chief Armstrong is always working with Wesley Bell and some other officers, playing basketball with the kids, talking to them. And if we're going to change anything, it has to start with the youth. And I think that's where they're working at, is with the youth. The force has changed a lot. I don't go to roll call as much as I used to when Chief Moss was here, because a lot of the ladies, will get up 6 o'clock in the morning, because I think when you go to roll call 6 o'clock in the morning, that shows the officers that you're going out of your comfort zone, because no one wants to get up at 4:30 in the morning and put makeup on just to go see a police chief at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think that effort needs to return, because they are out there protecting and servicing the community. And we as a community should show some type of, be reciprocal to what they're doing. In other words, we could go to roll call in the evening and say, hello, how you doing? We are glad that you are doing what you are doing. Even though you chose that career, we are pleased that you decided to come to Ferguson to protect and to serve us. So I see where the community can step up a little bit more and interact with the police. As far as our seniors, you find seniors don't have to call the officers as much as the younger people will. And since we are in the midst of this pandemic, I noticed the calls are on a rise, and I know the officers are doing their very best. So I see some other resources that can come alongside of the police and work with them. But all in all, there is a difference. And I just hope we continue to grow and continue to work to be the best city that we can be and the best police department that we can have. That's it.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I see a message from Bob. Oh, go ahead and respond.
So no, I was just gonna say, so I have to go. I wanna thank you again for inviting me. I think the team is staying, so they know a lot more than I do if anybody has any other questions, but thank you. It was so wonderful to see everybody. I hope that I get to see you again in person, you know, sometime soon, but who knows? But happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Stay safe and God bless. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, and good
Take care.
recovery to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Von Smith, you had a question or a comment. Do you want to go ahead and ask it? Hi, Mr. Smith.
The question, thank you so much, Ms. Butler. The idea is the renewed effort to overcome negative images. There's a need to get the positive additions and interactions known. Question is there a real wise effort being thought out to reinforce that the positive stories or the positive interaction, the new additions? I'm grateful to have just recently joined the Ferguson Ministers Alliance, and that's how I actually got wind of this meeting. And my church is at 8420 Hill Avenue, True Vine Missionary Baptist Church. And one of the things we want to do is to be part of the positive or be part of the solutions. But how do you find out about a survey that's being administered if you're not part of, as they say, a group that's making known some of the positive things that are taking place? We are excited about the new mayor and we commend you. We congratulate you. We actually had you come and speak at our church before this time when we were celebrating you at your inauguration. But how do you, is there a real mechanism that has been thought out to get the positive images, the positive things, the positive ways of looking at these real needed changes? Is there a real wise thought out effort to make sure that that's taking place?
Okay, so that fits in a lot of different categories. That almost sounds like the community plan that's being put together now. What's the name of the plan, Mayor?
Howard Ferguson?
Yeah, what's it, Jeff?
Isn't it our Ferguson? Is that what you're talking about?
But
Yeah.
that's the comprehensive plan. I think that's different.
Are you familiar with the comprehensive plan, Reverend Smith?
That's not what he's talking about.
Okay.
I think he's talking about the task
I hear
force.
him saying something like, is the police department, or do we have a community of people who are actually taking note of what's going on positive with the police department and getting it out to the broader community?
Public
For
relations.
example, when we have a new officer that is sworn in, is that shared with everyone where they will know we have a new officer, that officer is being sworn in? How can that information get out to everyone? If the police officer does something really nice or positive, like cutting someone's grass, does that information get out? You know, we love the firemen when they go up the tree and get the cat down. But how about
Public relations?
Yeah, so I think that's what he's talking about, getting more positive impact out there so people can see the good that the officers are doing.
Nicole, I may ask Nicole. It sounds like part of the community engagement.
She's not at her computer right now.
Okay, she's gone. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's hear from Shan.
I'll speak on it. And so, so one of the things that we do try to do is highlight, those such things. We have a Ferguson Police Department Facebook page. We have a Nextdoor page that we manage and we put information on. When it came to new officers, we typically try to highlight them in the Ferguson Times, and we would normally send in their picture and just, giving their name and their information that we have somebody new starting in the Ferguson Times. One of our challenges in that area just has to deal with manpower and workload. We don't have a dedicated team or a person that handles those things. And so, that's one of the things where, we trying to manage it on top of all the other, tasks and things that we have to do. Now, I will add this part in, though. One of the things that we're working on currently, we're working through the International Association of Chiefs of Police and their technical assistance program. And the area of technical assistance that we're working on is community engagement. And so we have some subject matter experts that are working with us. And one of the areas that come along with that is more of public relations and community relations. And so there's like a media specialist that's on our team that's working with us. And so, we have meetings every so often, and part of what she does is she monitors, our social media pages and things like that. So when we have our meetings, she can give us feedback on it and different things like that. But, she recognizes that, we don't have staff on hand to manage that full time, like, a lot of your larger agencies do, and that you see some agencies that have a much higher and more frequent social media profile. So that's one of the things that we're trying to work on. We've even talked about maybe if we could, with our internship program, maybe have an intern that could do that for us. And so we are trying some different, just different things and throwing some different ideas on the table to see, how we could do a better job of highlighting those things. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And actually, I do want to make a mention that I have noticed the improved flow of information. So you do let us know when things are happening, and that is appreciated. So,
Ms. Butler, before you continue, do you mind if I say something really quickly?
No, please.
Okay, great. So, Reverend Smith, one of the things that I wanted to just bring up again, as a shameless plug for the survey, right? So, if we could connect, and I can speak with maybe Nicole, but I'd love to get in touch with some of the other ministers and reverends to talk about the survey, because you're absolutely right, right? So if they don't know that it's there, how are they going to be able to engage? And how can we be able to tell the full story and capture the changes that are being made fully? And so again, shameless plug for the survey. That's another space that will be a data point. And everyone's personal experiences, like Ms. Mildred speaking, are absolutely valid. And I think that to couple that with the survey is really going to be able to tell a story that gets at what you're talking about, Reverend Smith. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are getting close to our end time, so I sort of want to wrap it up a little bit. So in particular, if you have any, just taking in all the information that we've gotten and the questions that you had, what have we, it's like, what else do you want to know? Is there some other part of the topic of consent decree that you think we should explore? If there is, go ahead and throw it in the chat. So, or if you say, oh, I got it now, I understand. Also, with that said, I'm going to throw this back to Alan.
Sure. Before Mildred, just his hands up. You want to?
Fran had.
Mildred, did you want to say something?
Fran had a question over the chat.
Oh, Fran.
Fran, do you want to just verbally ask it?
Oh, yeah, well, Ms. Tidwell is off the line, but I just wanted to get some clarification around Ms. Mildred's question that she asked. I don't know how many of you were on the last city council meeting that we had, but I specifically asked about that question to make sure that we were in compliance. And I know Ms. Tidwell talked about
what question?
The question that Ms. Mildred asked about other municipal police departments coming into the city of Ferguson.
Okay.
And the reason why I wanted some clarity around it was because I know Ms. Tidwell talked about, calls, like a call 1000. I remember reading within the consent decree that specific language around, what would be acceptable or not. But I think this was a situation where we've got other municipalities responding to calls for service. And as we go into the training and all of that, just because they're on the dispatch and they're able to respond to the call, without that proper training, and specifically coming into the 3rd Ward, which is predominantly the area that we're trying to get those surveys out into. I just want to make sure that we are in compliance and that we're not doing anything that we shouldn't be doing, especially given the fact that we're now starting to implement this training.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Mr. Stewart, Bob Stewart, are you still on the line? Is that a question that you're familiar with or issue that you're familiar with?
A little bit, and I think just to kind of amplify what Natashia had said was that there really is kind of a protocol for what we would normally call mutual aid when you've got a demonstration of something that's functional, that where there's time to plan for it. And so, you know, I think that any municipality who's a party to a mutual aid agreement probably has some idea, some knowledge that they will have to comply with the ideas. So we've had some discussion about it. What I hear though in the question is something that sounds more ad hoc, and somebody in a neighboring jurisdiction rides in to assist a Ferguson officer because they're close by. And to my knowledge, no, we don't have a protocol to kind of capture that, to my knowledge. And I think would only be aware if some problem had arisen out of that kind of interaction. But it's certainly worthy of discussion and for us to chew on jointly to see if that's something that we have to capture in a much more formal way. And it kind of begs the question: is there something has something occurred that really kind of brought that question to the fore in terms of a specific incident, or was this just a question, a what if kind of question? That
no, it was specific.
It's a great question, but I'm not sure that we've really looked into that far enough to come up with a methodology or a systematic way to capture that and to ensure that. But I would suspect that we probably ought to have some more conversation about it.
Yeah, it came up at the status hearing in the June status hearing, because some of the protests that happened in Ferguson regarding the Floyd murder, Ferguson had some municipalities assisted in Ferguson. And so there's some questions about if some of the occurrences during those times were proper or not, or allowable or not. And it came up at the status hearing. So we'll follow up on that some more because that's a good question. So if anyone,
I just want to be very precise, because what I'm talking.
Mr. Stewart's on the monitoring team too, so.
Yeah, because what I'm talking about was not in reference to the action. It was in reference to a call for service that was not on a day when we had action. And so I want to know specifically if we, if that is allowed. And from what I'm hearing, and just to be sure, for what I'm hearing that there's no protocol, meaning there's no process for it. But I didn't hear an answer as to whether it's okay or not, specifically in regards to when there is not an action, when there is not, something that is pre-planned and there's a protocol in place, because that is what is happening. And so,
Ms. Griffin, is there any information you can provide about this call? Because like I said, I never heard anything about it until the council meeting the other day when you brought it up. And I've sent an email to Chief Buchanan from Calvin and Park to ask, what it was or what was going on. But do you have any information about it? Because nothing was ever brought to my attention before that council meeting. So I don't know anything about this.
Right. Well, he basically said that it was he pointed to the, what is it, MO, whatever it is. He pointed that
of understanding, memorandum of understanding.
Yes, as the reason as to why he was responding to a dispatch call. And
do you know like the address, or like,
it was actually on Halpin and Lorette in the 3rd Ward. It was on Halpin and Lorette. And like I said, I just so happened to be in the area, and initially there was no Ferguson officer present on site. I sat and waited and watched just to see what was going on. And then after that, a Ferguson officer pulled up, and I just wanted to know, they were standing back away. There was, I wasn't preventing, them from doing what they were doing. And since I saw him standing to the side, I asked, why is Calverton parked in the 3rd Ward? And he made sure that he explained to me that there was an understanding between them and the city of Ferguson, and that he lived in the 3rd Ward, and that it was no problem at all. And so I just want to, in the interest of making sure that the city is not crossing any lines that we shouldn't, I really need to have an answer to that question so that we can move forward correctly without doing something that's causing us harm, in an interest of just simply trying to have more people out on the streets to
And
help.
that just might be a Calverton Park thing too, and we need to know that too, if he just made it up. So yes, let's.
Do you have a date range of when this happened?
I can make sure I give you a date. Because I can definitely give you a date. But it wasn't too much. It was literally just prior to our council meeting. So that's why I brought it up during there.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you happen to remember which Ferguson officer showed up out there?
I know what she looks like.
It was a female officer?
Yes, and that's a shame because I know her. I've seen her all the time.
White female, black female?
Black female.
Okay.
She has braids. Yeah.
Okay. To be continued. That sounds interesting.
And I'm sorry, I wanted all of the community to get their questions out before I ask the question. So that's why I put it at the end of the chat. I didn't want to take up any more.
No, that's interesting. I missed that. So now I know. So we said we were going to end at 8 o'clock. So that's why I'm just kind of like wrapping this up. If anybody has any suggestions, I think we're throw it in the chat.
Cassandra, I would like to just say this.
Laverne.
Hello. Councilwoman Griffin. And I just like to say this to you. You are always on target in terms of the people and what may hurt us or cause some problems for us. And I so appreciate that because when it came up before, I still wasn't clear as to what is the, if someone from Calverton is supposed to be operating under consent decree, if they come to assist or whatever. So by you saying more about it and Chief asking you questions, that says to me, you're trying to really get clarity on it, because I wasn't sure what was being said. If they should be doing it as long as they're following consent decree, or if they're doing it and they don't think they, supposed to be following it. So I think that needs to be very, very clear. If they're assisting us, it needs to be clear.
And one thing I just want to elaborate on, and those from the monitoring team can expand on this also. The consent decree doesn't dictate what others do. The consent decree is for Ferguson. And there's language in the consent decree that talks about when other entities, when other law enforcement agencies come into Ferguson for whatever reasons. And so now predominantly that revolves around a planned event. So if, there is some planned event where we need assistance for, and the exact language in the consent decree says that Ferguson Police Department is to request, and that's the word that is used in the consent decree, is we are to make a request of any law enforcement agencies that's coming into Ferguson that they abide by what is outlined in the consent decree. And so I just, want to make sure, and the consent decree is online for everybody to read, so you could, read this verbiage for yourselves. But, I think we cross hairs a little bit sometimes, thinking that the consent decree for Ferguson manages every other police department, even if they come into Ferguson, because there are laws in the state of Missouri where if you're a Class A city, any sworn law enforcement officer in the state can take certain actions anywhere in the state. And so like on state roads and state highways, any law enforcement officer in the state of Missouri is authorized to make a traffic stop for certain violations. They're able to enforce certain laws in the state, and the state laws of Missouri allow them and afford them that opportunity to do that, no matter where they are in the state, if they're in a city that has a certain classifications. And the consent decree it's not enforceable on them. Now, like I said, we can make the request, and that's what we do whenever we have any planned event. You know, I take the paragraphs that are spelled out in the consent decree and I cut and paste into the paperwork, the planning paperwork that goes out to all of the entities that are going to come into the city to assist us. And that is our request to them. Hey, this is what our consent decree says, and these are the things that we are abiding by. And this is our request for you all to do the same. But that's all that is outlined in the consent decree. The consent decree doesn't stipulate or mandate what somebody else and the authorities that are given to them by the state of Missouri, what they're able to do here. So
Okay.
I just wanted to explain
Okay,
that part.
Okay, so that I'm
There's a lot of questions, man.
Okay. Oh, this is quick. So that I'm clear on what you're saying. If you request Calverton to assist Ferguson, you're saying that as long as you tell them, I'm requesting your assistance, but you've got to follow what we have to do here in Ferguson with the consent decree. Is that what you're saying? As long as you tell them, I'm requesting your help, but we need you to follow what the consent decree says in helping us. Is that what you're saying?
That is the language in the consent decree, is that we are to make a request. It doesn't say that anybody has to follow that request. The language in the consent decree just says that we are to make a request. But the language in the consent decree is more specific to big events and planned events and responses. Now, you know, what Councilwoman Griffin is talking about, and in this instance, we got to go back and look and see. And as Bob was saying, you know, this really isn't something that we've talked about and discussed between the DOJ and us and the monitoring team, because the language in the consent decree is really not speaking to the scenario that she has presented. And so that's where we got to have, you know, more meetings and more dialogue and find out exactly what happened with this and what this was, and have some additional discussions to see if there's something else that we need to implement or to address when it comes to that.
Okay, so I just want to interrupt. So we're almost 15 minutes over, which is fine. So I wanted to go ahead and let Alan wrap up. But if you want to stay after he wraps up for another 10 or 15 minutes, we could do that. We'll hold the Zoom open for another 10 to 15 minutes for whoever wants to stay. So, Alan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, great.
Or...
So I was going to say the same thing. The reason for the 90-minute limit is just so we don't overstay our welcome. And appreciate everyone's participation so much, and don't want to keep you too late either. But anyone who wants to stay, we can keep this going for a while. But first and foremost, thank you, everyone. Thank you to everyone from the monitoring team. Thank you, Chief, Nicole, and everyone else who is participating as our experts also. And thank you for the wonderful questions and comments. There are 3 events that I would like to explain. The first one is we are planning our next Courageous Conversation, and we'd appreciate your input on what you think would be the next topic. We could do a 3rd one on the consent decree if you think that there are more issues that we need to explore, or we could go a very different direction. The second topic, we hope that's going to be in January. The second event you already heard is the monitoring team is planning a town hall sometime after Thanksgiving, and hopefully we can help get the word out for when that is. And the 3rd event is the next status hearing for the consent decree is January 12th at 11 o'clock, and it is going to be online. They're going to do it a little bit differently, that there's going to be either access through telephone, or there will also be, I think it's audio only. I'm not sure of this, but I think it's audio only through YouTube. So if you'd like information about that, please contact us. Obviously, the easiest way is always through our email, proud.ferguson@gmail.com. We are going to also trying to set up a web page so that we can post the video from tonight and from the previous consent decree discussion, courageous conversation also. So thank you very much, everyone.
This is Felicia. I have a question.
Hey, Felicia.
Hi. I would like to know more about the FPD internship program. Chief Armstrong, I see that you're here. Can you share more information or direct me to where I can get more information?
So we had a meeting with a professor from Harris Stowe State University a couple months ago, and they were interested in getting some of their students internship here with us. And so we have 2 of their students here right now. And so I think that was largely based off of some individuals I believe that Mayor Jones was familiar with, and she got them in contact with us, and we worked on that. And so we hadn't before then, we hadn't had just a blanket internship program that was advertised. That was more of some individuals that came to us trying to get that program off the ground and running. So we're still relatively new at it.
Thank you, Chief. Good
night. Have a good evening.
Everybody. I see you, Miriam. Hi,
Thank
Miriam.
Good night, everybody. Good night. It's a good meeting, you guys.
Everybody stay safe. Stay safe.
Good job, Proud.
What's next?
I'm proud of you all, Proud.
All right.
We're all proud of each other. Okay, bye.